Mayong adlaw. I'm Karl Aguro, a graphic designer and illustrator from Cagayan de Oro City. And today, I'm here in my studio slash apartment. Literally, my bed is in my right side. And today, I'm gonna be here for design dialogues at home to talk about illustration and composition. I run a local graphic design studio here in Cagayan de Oro City called Uncurated Studio, and I've been running it for almost 3 years already. And the kind of work that I do in the studio often involves branding and identity, publication design, packaging design, print design, illustration, sometimes photography. And I know you might be thinking that it's a lot, but I have always wanted my professional practice to be multidisciplinary because I think that it works for my advantage. And when I'm not dealing with clients or doing commercial works or really just to keep myself sane, because sometimes work can be very demanding and stressful, I tend to start a lot of personal projects, be it like a series of illustration work or a series of type-based work. Since I run the studio alone and most of the projects that I get in the studio are branding and identity projects, I kind of had to force myself to learn different styles and techniques in illustrating. Just because I think that every project has different approach and kind of different styles in illustration. If ever you wanted to add an illustration part of it. And so for a time, I kind of stopped obsessing and pressuring myself to have a personal style. However, last year I got a project to brand a ramen place here in Cagayan de Oro City. Part of the mandatory for that project was for me to create and design different posters to be used as part of the interior for the restaurant. So I remember doing 40 to 50 design with illustrations in the span of 2 weeks, and honestly it wasn't really like kind of a work for me because I was enjoying the process, and overall it was just a fun project for me. And then I realized that this project kind of reminded me of my ongoing obsession with anything vintage and anything that has to do with Japan. And so I like to believe that this style stemmed from these kind of obsessions and somehow manifested in the kind of personal work that I do. So from then on, I started doing personal illustration work that mimics the style. And eventually, I started exploring and experimenting on different techniques that I can use to further improve. And I noticed that sometimes I use flat colors for my objects, and then I add depth through shadow, and then eventually I started exploring how I can use typography inside this illustration, and so on. And but one thing that sticks out the most in most of these illustration works that I'm doing is composition. I like to stuff a lot of elements in the illustration that I work, and then I like to challenge also myself to see clarity on it. And I believe that proper composition can aid this one as long as you have a clear concept and a good grasp of visual hierarchy. So at the start of the quarantine, a lot of projects in my studio had been pushed back or postponed to a later date. And so I took the opportunity to start a personal project, and the very recent one was a series of illustration for city pop Japanese songs. So I thought it would be fun to visually translate the kind of nostalgia and emotions that I felt while listening to the songs. Although this particular series, only has 3 illustrations, you can really see how varied each illustration has. And then eventually I particularly had an interest in this kind of illustration. The second one, which has the soda cans. So it gave me a perfect opportunity to play around space, to play around typography. And today I'm gonna be showing you guys how I did this one. So stick around. On this project, you will be needing a sketch pad and a pencil or a paper. So basically any piece of paper where you can write your initial sketches. You can also use an iPad if you have one. And next is a computer or a laptop with Adobe Photoshop or Illustrator in it. And then this is optional, an iPad. For the purpose of for this video, I will be using my iPad with Procreate in it to show my process in coloring. And a music playlist that slaps because this will take quite some time to finish. So make sure you have a good music playlist accompany you while doing the illustration. So I usually start by making thumbnails and then trying to figure out what kind of layout or grid that I will implement in the illustration. In this particular series, I decided to use the layout in the third one and then figure out where to place the title and where to place the title song. In the initial thumbnails that we created, we went for the grid, this particular grid. So I started with using this grid. And then I proceed by adding the type within that side grid. So for this one, Vantage, which is the name of the artist. And then below I started placing the song title. And then I proceed by doing the 3D versions of the can. So Illustrator has a 3D feature, but it's not really as elaborate as it if you compare it to Cinema 4D. It's not really up to, advanced sculpting. You can just do like two kinds, like the revolve one, or if you want to add depth. For the silhouette, you need to trace the half part of it because in 3D it will just revolve. And so all you have to do, I change the color first to light so that you can see the shading, and then I go to effect, 3D, and then revolve. And then preview. So if you click the preview, you can see the full revolution of the 3D object. And in the appearance, go to appearance, you can go there just if you want to tweak the position of the 3D object. Then once we have the 3D object, I then started with creating the type label that I wanted to wrap around the can. For this one, I chose Vantage, like the name of the artist, and then I try to add other details like mimicking beer label. And then once I'm done with that, I grouped it and then drag it at the symbols so that I can use it to wrap around the illustration, the cans. And then after that, I go to appearance and then click again the 3D and try and start mapping the art label in the can. So in the map art feature, there are a lot of surfaces that if you want to add the type on a certain surface, you can do so because there's already section. So what I did was just to scatter to scatter and repeat the 3D cans. What I did was I just copied and pasted and then tweaked it in the appearance and then laid out it everywhere in the illustration window. At this point, it's a lot of trial and error, so you can just stop if you're satisfied with the layout. So for this illustration, I decided to add a beer bottle. So when I'm satisfied with the vector art that I did in Illustrator, I import it inside Procreate. I usually start by doing outlines of the artwork. So it would really take some time in doing the outline work, and at this point you can just really start coloring your artwork in Illustrator, but I kinda like the manual work for this one, just for me to have a control to mimic like a vintage poster. So I have a more control of the brush strokes that I'm doing while making the outline of the artworks. And I believe this is also possible when you use Photoshop. And then when I finished with outlining the artwork, I start to color the letters first in the grid. And if you as you can see, since this is part of a series, I use the color palette from the first illustration, and I then proceed to color blocking with the cans and other objects in the illustration. And this is what I really like about Procreate, because I can have a control if I decide to have shading. So there are a lot of really great brushes built in with Procreate, and you can also buy ones if you want a rather personalized and customized kind of brush. Sometimes brushes in Procreate are also available in as Photoshop brushes, so you can also use that in Photoshop. And then when I'm finished, I usually just add that swirls at the back to add like more fun inside the illustration. As an illustrator or someone who does illustration for a living, there is always that conversation about having your own personal style, right? In my case, the moment I stopped obsessing and really pressuring myself into having my own personal style, it's when it naturally came out. And even though if you think that you don't have a style, eventually your friends, your colleagues, or people who admire you will tell you that. I think the great thing about it is that you know in yourself that you are just having fun and you're just showing your own authentic self through your illustration works. Personally, I'm a very process oriented person, so I like to take time in doing my illustration work because it always leads to unexpected outputs, and honestly it's fun and exciting. And so I think one advice that I can tell, and it's very common, it's a common advice, just enjoy the process. Personal projects are great and fulfilling because it gives you an opportunity to explore your own personal interests without having limitations, and it's also a great way of exercise to further improve your craft. But I know starting personal projects can be really exciting, but just don't make it to a point that it becomes a chore for you. So do other things like take a break, like watch movies, read a book, listen to music, or do other things than doing art. That's it for today. I really hope that you learned something. And if you have questions, just write it in the comment below. And we'll also be posting an illustration exercise that you can do and try at home using the techniques and advice that I shared earlier. Just don't forget to tag at Uncurated Studio and at NHAVPH so we can check your works. So thank you so much for watching. Again, this is Karl here in my apartment and studio in Cagayan de Oro City, and this is Design Dialogues at Home.